Morning, everyone. This is Edison Guzman with Joe Ranney of Ranney Law Firm. Good morning, Joe. How are you?
Good, Edison. How are you?
Very good. Very, very good.
I'm going to hijack your intro
Okay.
because I know you had a question set up for today, but actually the topic of the week is really getting people out of nursing homes, because this week I have three different circumstances that really provide a nice vignette of how we get people out of nursing homes and the different types of situations that are putting people into nursing homes. So,
All right. So I'm sure you have a couple of cases and you're just flowing with all this information. So let me try to guide you into at least some of the questions that people may be asking.
all right.
So why would you want to get someone out of a nursing home, first of all?
Well, because typically they're better off at home. We know nursing homes, by law are required to provide a minimum of 3.5 hours of care. It's a challenge for them to be able to do that. The understaffing issues, people are living in an environment that's more of a hospital than it is a home. And even if you have dementia, you know that much. So the lack of the quality of life, and typically home where they are, even with pets. There's a higher risk of falling in a nursing home than there is at home, even with a pet. So, home is just typically a better environment. And oftentimes because you have a support system, perhaps family caregivers, or perhaps we're integrating outside services, you can actually have more care and better care at home than in a congregate care setting, which is, a nursing home, assisted living, those types of things. Although don't get me wrong, there are some assisted living facilities and places that are great, but they're hard to find and typically expensive.
Okay, so two questions come to mind. Now, actually, one question, and this is it. If who gets to decide to leave the nursing home? Is it the patient or is it the children or the relatives of the patient?
Well, the patient is presumed to have capacity and always has the right to want to leave the nursing home. Powers of attorney, healthcare proxies as well can, force a person's discharge into an environment. The key, of course, is the discharge planning to make sure that when the person gets home, there are the supportive services they need so they don't end up back in a hospital or a nursing home.
Now, which of the two is more expensive to do, to be cared for at home or to be cared for at a nursing home?
Cared for in a nursing home, unless Medicaid. I mean, as far as assets, private pay, things of that nature, nursing homes are up to $20,000 a month. How quickly you're going to go through money there. Even when we look at, having to live in 24-hour, it's not going to cost that much. The barriers are typically, do you have a room where someone could live, where someone could be? And finding that person.
Right.
But challenge also, and sometimes when we're looking for caregivers, we're looking for them in unique ways, because we're looking for people, obviously, to assimilate, with my client. Some people with dementia revert back to a native language. You want a caregiver who speaks the native language. And you look for folks in different ways, word of mouth, advertisements in papers. It's just, it's a challenge, but the key is to find, the right person to have the best quality of life.
Right, and then you have individuals that also need to care for things like dementia or things. It's not just the physical aspect of being, out of a nursing home but into a home, but also if they have dementia, that's a totally different thing that you have to deal with now.
Well, caring for dementia, there's a big issue going on now as far as, do you need skilled nursing, licensed care, or companion care? So with dementia, until dementia is very advanced where it's compromising physical function, it's more companion care and engagement. And, speaking with someone, making sure they're not wandering, self-directing, and assisting them. And if they have a loss of mobility, well, dementia or no, when someone loses mobility, they receive the same types of services. But as far as dealing with dementia, you're never correcting somebody with dementia. So you have to, as we say, live in their world in order to provide those supportive services. But it doesn't necessarily have to be licensed care. And that's why when we're looking to cobble together, service delivery in the home, it's not just necessarily looking for the licensed care agency.
Right. All right. So let's turn the attention a little bit more towards paying for all of this, because, and I know many people who are asset rich, but liquid poor. What does the person need to do if obviously, if you don't qualify for Medicaid, and Medicaid's the one that will help you with all these things, unless you correct me and tell me if I'm wrong. But what are some of the things that happen when someone is asset rich and liquid poor?
All right, let me get into that sort of a different way. So I have these 3 cases. I'm getting people out of nursing homes.
Yeah.
Provides a nice vignette. One is a 60-year-old stroke victim who was transferred from the local hospital, basically an hour away, 40 miles, and now they've discontinued rehabilitative care and are trying to move him to long-term care. And of course, he needs rehabilitation. So we're trying to get him transferred to a local rehabilitative hospital. Another individual, 86 years old. He's in a nursing home. His power of attorney and healthcare proxy want to keep him there instead of getting him back into a community environment, because they don't want him to live with the sibling who would otherwise be taking care of him. So they'd rather have him in a nursing home than in a loving home environment. And then the third one, 86 years old, very independent, never married, no children, very independent, and has now spent his second stint in a nursing home because he falls, later found, brought to the hospital, and has mobility issues, which we have to facilitate. So he's supposed to be getting discharged on Sunday. We have a care plan meeting in a couple hours, and that is to get him home, and we have to facilitate, the services. So the first individual, where we're trying to get transferred, has income, doesn't own a house, really doesn't have lots of assets, and we're going to be applying for Medicaid once we get him back in New York. The individual in the nursing home, where we're trying to get discharged home on community Medicaid, he'll be on Medicaid, and those services will be paid through Medicaid. Third person, where we're getting him discharged, shortly, he has assets. He has property, no income, not much income, and we're going to have to figure out how to pay and private pay for the services he'll receive home, and cobbling together those services. So for the folks on Medicaid, obviously there were the spend downs, the qualifications, and now they'll be receiving those benefits. And we've talked before about the income and how that can be utilized. The third individual with the property, but no income because of his advanced age, he's not getting a mortgage. The only potential is the reverse mortgage. And see what we can do to pull. He has a couple of rental properties down south that's providing, somewhat of an income stream. So we cobble together the finances that way. And that's how we end up figuring out who's going to pay for it. And for all 3, having protected the assets for themselves and their families, to provide the best quality of life while they're living, and anything left over doesn't go to the government, but goes on to beneficiaries, children, heirs.
So you have all these beneficiaries, but what happens? I think you mentioned one of the individuals that didn't have siblings, that didn't have children. What happens at that point? Is there a guardianship is
No, because guardianship is a difficult legal process, and we're always looking to preserve personal independence, decisional independence, financial independence. So really the power of attorney and the healthcare proxy, in this situation, because they're not very close to the individual and he has his doubts, distrusts of people. He's been a very solitary man all of his life. So in those circumstances, we actually put in what's called a monitor. So a person who has to be included in decision making. For a power of attorney, a person who oversees what the power of attorney is doing. And that way make sure that we have a balance.
So these are all things that you've pre-planned already. These are individuals that I'm hoping that they've already
Don't
planned
assume
everything.
that. Don't assume that. No, this particular situation with the care plan meeting in a couple hours, I parachuted in last week. And then the niece and nephew were told he's being discharged home on the 28th. Wherever he goes, he's going home. And there were no services. He was reluctant to accept services. And, I had to go in, go to the nursing home, spend the time to meet with him and discuss things. There's a mild onset of dementia, but you spend the time and, bring things and documents and show things, then he understands. We actually went out yesterday to look at the property, see how we can facilitate, his accommodation in his home, as well as what he calls the farm, which is, 85 acres that he likes to go to. And how we're going to use the assets to coordinate that discharge plan. And the niece and nephew are involved. They're good folks, but we have a level of distrust. And, as Reagan used to say, trust but verify. So we put in those protections and those oversights so that everybody's comfortable. Because on the other hand, as far as the power of attorney and healthcare proxy, recognize that they have responsibilities, as we've talked about before. So they're concerned about, him not following through on what we are trying to do. And then somehow they have, some sort of personal responsibility, etc., which they won't. So that's how, every situation is unique, but we cobble it together. But I assure you, he'll be home on Sunday. Yeah.
I'm sure they will because they have you on their side. But would this have been maybe easier had they had a plan of action in place, or is this typical where people just don't plan it out and then they run into these issues?
Planning for anything is always better. But sometimes unavoidably, you end up in crisis situations. And you deal with the cards you dealt, so to speak. And a lot of it is misinformation, miscommunication, misunderstanding. So yes, planning, ahead would help. If I had been planning ahead for him with the power of attorney, healthcare proxy, we would have had all those protections in back then. So when we had this most recent hospitalization and rehabilitation, we would have had a better coordinated response for him getting out rather than now jumping in crisis. Quite frankly, house cleaning has to be done before he gets in. You have to coordinate the care with, in this situation, a licensed care agency, as well as potentially the companion care. It's hard to do that in 4 days. And then it's expensive to do that in 4 days, right? With better planning, it wouldn't be so financially, crisis driven at this moment. So, yeah, planning always helps. But it comes and we respond. And as I say, the whole idea is getting everybody together and creating the understanding, because that's how legally we effectuate the result. Papers get the result done, but if we don't have a coordinated plan and strategy and confidence that it's going to be done, well, then you got a bunch of documents that are worthless and someone who ends up back in a nursing home. That's not the way I like to work.
No, absolutely not. A question for you here, though. Does it matter if obviously if you have an attorney on your side, everything helps a lot, but more. But is it different for blended families, gay marriages? We're in New York State, of course, so we have to go according to the laws here. But is it different for that? Would it be more difficult for you to have done anything in a situation like this? I mean, obviously we just said planning is better, but
So,
can you
well,
address that?
well, yeah, with blended families, it's very important to do the planning because you absolutely can have conflict, and many times do have conflict, between a child from a former marriage and the current spouse. Sometimes, no matter how many years have passed in between, including decades, I've had this conflict. So, yes, with blended families, just like, with assets or trusts that you create to take care of prior families or maybe satisfy, divorce obligations, and also protecting, your future family, spouse, etc., and seeking to provide for them as well. And yes, the advance directives relative to these situations, when we're in those crisis situations, all that planning, you know, very important to avoid all that conflict.
Hmm.
Because let's face it, if if we're dying, the last thing we want is our family back. We want everybody coordinated. But even where there's conflict, at least having people understand their roles so that we can coordinate, as best we can. But typically, you can avoid all that stuff.
All right, so I want to start wrapping this up right now, but of all the three cases you've had here, what's one message, other than obviously, you got to plan ahead, but what's one message that you can give people, even if they don't plan ahead? I know you've been doing this for 3 or 4 decades now. What's one thing you would say that people should at least listen to right now?
Persistence. Persistence. Ask questions, understand the planning meetings, understand the discharge meetings, understand what the needs are and how those needs can be fulfilled. Ask questions and be persistent. Don't accept that, oh, the nursing home says, right? I'm in court last week, and there's an attorney that says, oh, the nursing home says. Well, who are they? Is that a doctor at the nursing home? Is that a nurse? A care aide, administrator? Who's saying this person can't go home? It's in their financial interest for him not to go home, but you don't expect that from a lawyer, right? Where you're dealing with somebody's life and how they're living, their quality of life. So you have to be persistent because even people in authority, seek to push you off or poo-poo you or, the grand, wazoo says, be persistent. Be persistent, ask questions. Don't feel like you're ignorant or that, and anything like that because they're so smart. They're not. We're dealing with people who you've dealt with all your life and you know what they want, know what they need, and you're the best advocate for them, not somebody telling you, what, necessarily what has to happen. Question, be involved, and you'll get the response, and then you can have an appropriate plan so that person doesn't end up in the hospital, so that your life as a companion or caregiver or supporter is easier. Because without you, we can't take care of the other person. We look at assistive devices, lightweight wheelchairs, walkers that aren't just those flimsy things, the grab bars, assistive devices. That also helps the caregiver and the supporter and gives them more comfort and security. When you're standing around and someone's all of a sudden starts to wobble and you're wondering if they're, going to end up on the floor. So we're always looking to provide that. Because otherwise you end up with 2 people.
Yeah, absolutely. Persistence. I love that. And you're absolutely right. Ask the right questions, get the facts, get all the facts, not just from one source. So Joe, if someone is trying to get the facts from you, how would they contact you?
Phone 845-651-0999. Website, rannilaw.com, and email joeranny@rannilaw.com.
Awesome. All right. Well, this has been eye-opening as usual. So there are so many other topics we're going to go into. This one was a good one. I know that you have these cases, and that's top of mind. That's why we change things up a little bit sometimes. But I'm glad that you did, because this is something that is going to help a lot of people out there when they watch these videos.
Well, by the end of next week, I'm going to have one person home and one person transferred to an appropriate environment.
Excellent. Excellent.
It makes a difference. And that
Absolutely does.
so.
All right, Joe. So I am going to see you at the next video. I'm going to see everyone else at the next video. You take care.
Take care, Edison. Have a good holiday.